Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 9 of the Blockchain Bay podcast. My name is Chris, and today I'm joined by Ariel Seidman, the CEO and founder of Hivemapper, as well as Brad from Deepin Connection and Joe from Network Bits. This is one of the best conversations we have had, and it shares a lot of insight on the future of Hivemapper.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey in the map world.
All right, let's do it. Well, good to see all you guys on a Sunday morning, or maybe Sunday afternoon for some of you guys. So this is fun. No, I've definitely been watching your guys' podcast and just really appreciate the thoughtfulness that you guys put into it. And so when you asked me to join, I was happy to join. So look, I've been in maps and mapping for basically my entire professional career. Coming out of school, I basically went to this company called Yahoo. Many of you may know that. And it was a fun time to be a Yahoo because we were actually very competitive with Google. And so I was in product management focused on search, sat within the larger search group. Search had roughly 33% market share versus Google at the time, which was like 35, 38. So they were definitely gaining on us, but the talent that we had in Yahoo search back in the time, I'm still friends with many of those people actually, was quite phenomenal. But as a good example of like talent on its own is not enough. You need strategy, you need capital, right? There's all these other components that you need obviously to win. I ultimately looked after all of Yahoo Maps. And that's when I had kind of a front row seat to what Google was doing. And when they really started to get better was when they started to collect their own data, right? They were licensing data from a whole bunch of different providers at the time, but then they started to do Google Street View programs, satellites. They had a bunch of other aerial data collection platforms where they literally had Cessnas or other kind of private jets that they were flying around at like about a couple thousand feet above the ground, taking super, super high resolution imagery. So it was a very, very, very expensive data collection program that they had, and they had multiple aspects of that. But fundamentally, their maps start to get dramatically better than ours. And so the obvious thing to do was, okay, we got to pony up here, right? We also have to be collecting, at the scale that they were. So we talked about it internally as like you crawl the virtual world. In other words, you crawl the web, and we did that obviously for the purposes of the search engine. But now we need to crawl the physical world. Long story short, Yahoo CEO management was not interested in spending like $300 million a year collecting this data. Like they were kind of torn between, are we a media entertainment Hollywood company or are we a technology company? And so, they had simply no appetite for that. And so I got frustrated and left. In my first company, Gigwalk, the idea was basically as like mobile mechanical Turk. So we had about 2 million people all over the world collecting data with iPhone and Android devices for a whole range of companies, many of them actually in the mapping space. But even beyond that, Bloomberg Financial was a customer, Procter & Gamble was a customer, World Health Organization, and so on. The issue with that business was fundamentally we didn't own the data, right? And if you don't own the data, your economics are pretty challenged because you just basically become a data collection platform. And you can't like take one piece of data and then resell it many, many, many times. And so, by Silicon Valley terms, I think that was like maybe a single, not even. But anyways, I left and I was still very motivated to build out what I saw at the time was like, let's go build a map, right? Like the challenge with crowdsourced maps has historically been that, yes, they are more cost effective than a centralized data collection platform or data collection system like Google Maps. But fundamentally, the quality starts to drop pretty dramatically, and by doing a crowdsourced. And once you do that, it's just not very relevant for a lot of use cases, right? Especially the higher value use cases. So there's always this tension between how do you do crowdsourced, right? And Hivemapper today is a version, obviously, of crowdsourced, but how do you maintain very, very, very high quality? And those two things are a little bit at tension with each other. And so there's a balancing act there in terms of how do you actually do that? And how do you do that at global scale? So 2015 rolls around. I'd kind of taken a little bit of time off and was okay. Early 2016, I was ready to go. And that's when we effectively kind of, the modern day Hivemapper that you see today is effectively, that was the beginning of it. Now, we started with drones. Because we thought that it had a dual purpose perspective, right? In other words, usually like you have aerial data collection and then you have street level data collection, right? And they're totally different. And what we discovered, or what we thought with drones, was you would get the aerial perspective, obviously, but because they fly pretty low to the ground, you would also get the street level perspective, or most of it. You don't get 100% of it. And anyways, drones did not work. The battery technology never really improved beyond, like, at least for commercial drones, like beyond 45 minutes, which was a huge problem in terms of scaling this cost effectively. And then you had all these issues with like legal, right? The city of Palo Alto would have different rules than the city of like Mountain View, which would have different, rules than like the city next to it. So it was just a total mess. So we did switch to street level, full on. And the thing that we observed pretty early on was that if you look at the history of mapping, the first kind of revolution was satellites. That was like early 2000s. The next revolution was, Google Street View, right? Imagery at scale, street level. A lot of the data that you see in Google Maps is derived from the imagery from Google Street View, right? So the names of the businesses, the names of the street signs, all that kind of stuff, the addresses, etc. So that was obviously like pretty transformational. And that was like early, 2006 to like 2010. And then mobile phones, in other words, Android and iPhone, and that basically gave you GPS traces at scale, right? And so like traffic was obviously pretty important. That's what effectively like Waze did. But the thing that was missing was effectively like high refresh or high cadence visual. So in other words, high fidelity, what I refer to as the eyes, on a global scale. Right? Because the problem with motion or movement or GPS traces is that you can't really understand what's going on, on that on its own. So for example, if Google can tell you, okay, yeah, traffic usually flows at 40 miles an hour, boom, it starts to slow down and it goes 10 miles an hour. They can tell you that, right, from just GPS traces. That's pretty straightforward. But what they don't know why. Like, is it a 3-car crash? Is it a fender bender? Is it flooding like I experienced in Dubai a couple weeks ago? Is it police activity? Is it road construction? All of those are very, very different, right? And you would take different actions based upon what actually occurred. If it's a little fender bender, you'd be like, okay, I'm going to stay on this road. Like if it's a 3-car crash with injuries, you're not going to stay there, right? Or you're not going to like go on that street. So the visual high fidelity at incredibly high refreshes is kind of the next revolution, or the holy grail that, obviously Hivemapper's after, that I've been after for a long time now. Okay. So now what we tried first with iPhone and Android devices. iPhone, Android devices did not work. There were a lot of issues. One is just the friction associated with mounting your phone. And then every time you get in the car, you have to open up the app and hit start recording or start mapping or something, right? Most normal people don't do that. Like, it'll work for a couple thousand people or whatever, but like, if you fast forward 4 years from now or 5 years from now, and you still want to have a great map, you're not going to get 500,000 people doing that. Like that's just not going to happen, right? People are like, I'm going to the bar, I'm going to the restaurant, I'm meeting my friends, I'm driving the kids to school, whatever it is. Like they're not going to take that time to like open up the app and hit the thing, right? So like to me, that's a non-starter. And we saw that, by the way, like, when we were doing these different, iterations with our iPhone app and Android app, like we saw the churn rates were just ridiculous. So the other issues is like positional accuracy, the phones overheat, all this kind of stuff, right? Somebody should do this test, like go drive in Phoenix, Arizona in the middle of the summer with their iPhone mounted, on their dash cam. That thing will not last long. Okay, so then we tried it with a third-party dash cam. Actually, it was a Blackview, for those of you who may be familiar with that specific brand. And it definitely worked better, right? So in other words, what happened was we saw the contributor churn, decrease dramatically. So that was great, right? That was obviously like really important because people just turn on their car, the thing would start mapping. The issue was backhauling all the data off the device was really, really complicated, right? People have taken SD card in, out of the thing, move it, they forgot it, they lost it. It was just a mess, right? And then they would try to like sometimes, and then like the GPS data that we would get from the device, even if it was okay from a quality perspective, it wasn't frequent enough, right? So, I forgot the number of hertz it was, but it was like way too low. And then the positional accuracy of those devices, like that's not what they're investing in. Like they don't need like mapping level positional accuracy. And so we're like, okay, crap, we got to go build our own. So this is a story actually most people don't know is we got a contract for $2 million to build the first one. That one, like we never shipped it at the scale that we see today. But we got a contract to build it. We got a contract for $2 million to go build the first version. And we launched that version. So we had about 100 devices. We did it in Los Angeles, Lagos, Nigeria, and the Philippines. And it worked. And it worked really, really well, actually, like beyond our expectations, this first device. And so we're like, okay, this is working. This is pretty cool. And we were paying people cash at the time. And then we're like, okay, look, if we now go raise a whole bunch of money from a venture capitalist, like $50 million, $100 million, we're paying people cash. If you play this out far enough, okay, Google will just do the same thing, right? And then they'll just pay people like, rather than paying them a cent a kilometer or whatever it was we were paying them, they'll pay them, 5 cents, they don't care.
Hey, Ariel, when was that, when you guys launched that model?
It's like 2019.
Okay.
Yeah. That contract actually saved the company. Like we were about to go bankrupt, and then boom, we got that contract, and then the customer was very happy. We were obviously very happy because we built the first 100 devices, etc. And so then, it was painful. Like it did not look like, in terms of looks of the device, it looked like total crap bread. But it worked. That was the most important thing. And so then I saw what Helium was building. And I was like, that's really fascinating. Like the business model, which economically aligns all the participants towards building something really valuable together, was inspiring, quite frankly. And I think there was like passion in that community that like within our community didn't exist, right? And I was like, okay, that's super interesting. Long story short is, I got introduced to Amir. Amir was very helpful. They then introduced me, or he introduced me to like the Multicoin guys, who then, introduced me to the Solana guys, or actually it was Anatole who introduced me to the Multicoin guys. Anyways, like it all kind of came together into effectively the modern day Hivemapper, what you see today. So that was a long intro. I apologize, guys, but hopefully that's helpful.
I think Helium was an inspiration for a lot of these DeepIn projects that are out there today. So I think it served a good purpose in that sense. And I think later we'll talk about some of the learnings from that project that are being incorporated into projects today. But I think it'd be good for the community to understand, like, what would be your elevator pitch if, when someone asks you what Hivemapper is, but also, you mentioned Google, obviously is the major player in mapping to this point from a street level imagery standpoint. So curious, like, is that the market you're going after? Are you looking to emerge into newer markets? Like, what's the total addressable market from like a revenue standpoint as you see it?
Yeah. So look, from a scale perspective, it's really important. I always talk about there's 3 things. Customers care about coverage. So in other words, like, do you have the coverage? Because you don't have the coverage, then it's not like, really interesting. Then like, okay, why are we having this conversation, right? Then the coverage you have to have has to be has to be high quality, right? So a lot of the things that we do, internally, and then obviously with customers as well, is focus on quality, because you could have all the coverage and the big numbers you have, I got 20 million road kilometers, whatever it is. If it's not high quality, it doesn't matter. Okay. So, the thing though that we differentiate on is definitely freshness, right? And so that's number 3. And that's the number 3 thing that customers really care about, is that freshness. But it is the core kind of, and we're talking about before, of like, if you can get the kind of freshness that we're after, right? In other words, you're seeing a given location 3, 4, 5, 6 times per week with eyes, in other words, with high visual fidelity, that is the big unlock that we're all after. Now, let's talk a little bit about the market that we're going after. There's really 3 segments, right? First of all, it's all navigational, right? So it's like, how do you get people and products from point A to point B? We're focused on basically APIs for businesses, right? So these are, other businesses that are taking our data products and integrating them into the crux of their operations so that they can make their operations more efficient and so forth, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. We're definitely competitive there, and we have customers there. The second one is in basically autonomous vehicles, right? And there's many levels of that, right? So there is autonomous vehicles at the level of, level 2, which is commonly referred to as ADAS, or advanced driver systems. So that would be like a Ford Blue Cruise, right? In other words, it can take you and drive you on the highway. Obviously, you're still, in the driver's seat, but you're monitoring and there all the time, right? All the way up to like a level 4, which would be something like a Cruise or a Waymo, which is kind of like commonly referred to as like a robo-taxi, where there is no driver, okay? Maps are a critical component of those things, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that is in a moment. And then obviously like our refresh capabilities into that are really, really valuable for those customers. That is probably the biggest market. The third market that we're not yet competitive in is basically consumer navigation, right? And so that will take more time for us. So that would be like competing, head to head with like a Waze or a Google Maps on your phone. We do believe that we are differentiated there because of what we're talking about before, which is like Google is effectively guessing, when they tell you there's a backup or there's traffic, they don't know fundamentally why, whereas we do. Now, in order to be very competitive in that market, we do need other layers of the map. So we need like, traffic and places and all this other type of stuff that we'll have to build out. But the contributor app that you see today and that many of you use today will ultimately start to carry and build towards that vision of a full-blown consumer navigation app. Okay, so those are the 3 markets that we're after. The first part of that, Brad, to ask you from a total addressable market, it's probably like somewhere in the range of 5 to 7 billion. The second category is probably north of 20 billion. No one knows for sure what that market is because it's still kind of growing. And then the third market is probably in the range of like 13 to 20 billion, right? So those are kind of like what you're talking about in terms of total size of these markets. If you do this at the kind of scale that we're hoping to do it at, you're touching, billions of people every single day and hundreds of millions of vehicles, right? You're integrated into hundreds of millions of vehicles that are navigating themselves in, slightly lower level autonomy, like a level 2, or higher levels of autonomy.
Makes sense. So like 40 to 50 billion, somewhere in that range total.
Yeah. So that's a little bit about kind of the markets that we're going after. They will take some time. Like I was like being very blunt with folks here is like, this doesn't happen overnight, right? Like you're building out these data products and the quality that needs to be reached in order to be truly competitive there is challenging. And like a lot of the investment that you see us making in terms of that Map AI trainer platform is focused on the quality aspect, right? So it's not just about the Map AI and the data collection devices, in other words, the dash cams. It's like there's a layer of quality assurance that the Map AI trainer platform provides us with, which is quite unique, frankly, that is absolutely necessary to like being very competitive with all those markets that I talked about before.
Sure. But there is revenue coming through the door. I mean, we see it. The token burn started, man. I was curious about that. There's over 2 million honey tokens burned, it looked like. Was that retroactive, or is that just starting with this week? Do you know?
It was just this week.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome to see, man.
So one of the things I'm curious is, and you elaborate a little bit on this prior, using crypto as an incentive, what are some of the lessons that you learned from this endeavor?
That it works. No, but seriously, it can work too well sometimes. And so you need to be careful about how you use it. Because like the reporting capability, right, is a good example of this. The Map AI trainer. Let's start with that actually. Map AI trainer platform. Originally it was built to be able to handle, like in the very early days, like last year when we launched it. I think it was about actually this time. It was like April or March timeframe when we launched it. it was like designed to like handle like maybe a couple thousand reviewers, Map AI trainers. And I think we're up to like, I don't know, 20, 30,000 or something like that per week. And so we've had to effectively go and rebuild that thing, which we're in the process of doing it, because a lot of the reputation and other mechanisms that worked at like 1,000 or 2,000 don't work at like 25, 30,000. And so, you have to like, probably every 6 to 9 months, as you reach a new level of scale, you have to basically rebuild half of the kind of core components of it to be able to handle the next level of scale.
That makes sense. Do you ever see a point where it'll be trained well enough that you won't need to continue having that aspect? Or do you think we'll always need people to continue training these models?
So it goes in cycles. So in other words, like speed limit signs is a good example, or stop sign is a good example. It's very basic, right? So you train a whole bunch of data on stop signs. You do it by country or whatever. They look a little bit different, but they're pretty similar across most countries, right? And then the models get to like the point where 99% of the time, if not more, they can identify by themselves a stop sign. And so you don't need the Map AI trainers to be like labeling data and, confirming stop signs, that frequently. But you have other, more complex objects that do, right? And so you basically move these Map AI trainers from, the easy, and then the easy becomes, to the hard, and then the hard becomes the easy, and then you find something else for them to do. And so, as I play this out over the next 5-7 years, there will always be like these edge cases or these just challenging scenarios where humans will be required. Somebody said this, and I think it's correct. It's not my line, but the last 5% is, just as hard as the first 95% in maps and all this type of stuff that we're working on. So that last 5%, yes, you absolutely do need Map AI trainers, and they need to be involved. And, our challenge, or our what we're building and designing the system to do is very flexible, right? So you can like very quickly retire, a certain type of game, or focus on a specific object, and then just move them into the next thing. So that's one part of their job. The other part of their job is quality assurance, right? So let's just take speed limit signs, right? We want to verify that, that we have identified that this is a speed limit sign and we have positioned it correctly, right? Or a turn restriction sign, that we've identified it correctly with the right time restrictions, and it's attached to the right drive path, right? In other words, it's like the left lane or whatever lane it's associated to. Like, so they perform all of that QA today, and that's hugely valuable. What I tell the team internally here is like Google, hires, a lot of full-time people to go do this stuff, in India and other parts of the world. And they have like entire teams of doing this. And here you go. We have this like decentralized, all these wonderful people all over the world doing this type of stuff. And they do a good job, right? I mean, like there are systems and verification layers and all this kind of stuff, but they do good work. And I think that goes unseen by many of the drivers that don't fully appreciate that.
So one of the issues I'm wondering about, and comes from a conversation I seen the other day in the Discord, is the governance of Hivemapper, how you came to the conclusion of really like a top-down governance from the team, Hivemapper Inc., Hivemapper Foundation, and described in so many ways as not a DAO, not a decentralized autonomous organization. What was your thought process behind this type of governance model?
I think, look, the whole process of decentralization, I think if you start off from day zero and you're fully decentralized, you're basically dead day zero, in my opinion, right? And what I think what's really required is that the community needs to start to like get really, I think you guys have been very helpful in this regard, is starting to really understand the nuances of what it takes to build a map, right? Understanding the markets that we're going after, why we're going after those markets, right? How to balance, the data collection part of the equation from the data processing, from the data QA, right? You got to be able to understand how all of these pieces play together to ultimately produce an amazing map for, businesses, for cars, for consumers. And so, I think this group right here, in addition, probably if you add Josh to that, Leo to that, a couple others, right, folks in the community have now, and I think you said this well, Joe, is have now really spent the time to learn about maps and mapping technology and how to balance this crowdsourcing, effort all over the world, where it now makes more sense to say, okay, how do we include those folks in the governance process? Right. And I think we've already started to do that. Josh has authored a couple of MIPs. We want other folks in the community to author additional MIPs. And I think what we're going to start to do is say, okay, look, there are going to be people who have kind of risen up through the community and have demonstrated a level of thoughtfulness. And they're going to be the ones who are going to basically perform the gating function to say, okay, we're going to allow this MIP to go through. Right. Right. And so I think that has to happen. And if you don't root it in people who are incredibly thoughtful about the wider map and what we're trying to build, then guess what's going to happen? You're just going to have a whole bunch of people show up and basically be like, vote me all the tokens. I mean, I would.
That's exactly right. And I say a lot of this governance process, especially in crypto, the biggest hurdle is getting past what is, much like the elections here or in any other country in the world where, you have the kitchen table issues. Basically, it comes down to what affects that individual. And 95% of the time, they're not engaged with the nuances. The other 5% of the time, they come in, kick over the table, and vote with their feet. So what I think of the Hivemapper system is you have so many metrics that you can work with now that is not necessarily just the token holdings or just how much hardware someone owns, but how much they've actually contributed. So you have, of course, fleet owners, you have AI trainers, you have the people who are invested in it through hardware. So you can use those metrics to have some sort of hierarchy, some sort of balance in that voting system where, you can delegate out some of these votes that we may see in the future. But overall, I say I agree with how it's played out so far.
You guys were in the community last year, right? When we kind of, last January, February, when we were starting to really just grow and scale up. A lot of people started to come into the system, and what they very quickly realized was it was not one token or X token per road kilometer mapped, right? It was like very dynamic based upon, where you drove, like what region you drove in, what specific roads in that region you drove in, and a whole bunch of other factors, right? And a lot of people were very, very adamant that the system was fundamentally unfair and corrupt and whatever, right? Because, Brad, who is mapping in Chicago, is making more than, me, who's mapping in whatever, this part of California, okay? And people said, like, the system is corrupt, the system is unfair, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, look, like, there's just like, it's not about unfair or fair, it's about utility and value to the map. Right. And so if it was the way where everybody earned the exact same amount, regardless of where they're mapping, do you know what people would do? I mean, they would just literally drive in circles all day long.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you're not going to build a map that way. So like, why is, it's not about like, is it the right thing or the wrong thing, or is it morally correct or not? Like, that's not the conversation. The conversation is like, we're here to build a map, and it has to be designed to incentivize the coverage and the freshness necessary in order to create the map.
Yeah. And I have to say, I mean, the MIPs that have gone out, I've agreed with the thought behind all of them. Sometimes the execution, I mean, I don't always 100% agree with all of the execution, but that's, you're never going to agree with everything. But also the thing you said is dynamic, right? So as opposed to really rigid tokenomics, like a Helium, for example, these tokenomics are dynamic in the sense that you can make adjustments throughout time. So if you maybe over adjust something, future MIPs can bring it back into the balance, and I think we're seeing some of that, right? So all in all, like I do agree with all the thought process behind moving the project forward with all these MIPs. I think there's always a delicate balance though, right? Because you do have X number of tokens that can go to the community. So you need to balance that between future contributors and current contributors. And there might be times where maybe there's an over adjustment one way or the other that has to be, balanced over time. And we're still early in this. And I think people need to understand, like, one change isn't going to make the whole, the sky fall or the universe end here. Like, we can make future adjustments over time to keep this thing rolling. So, but again, I just want to stress, like, that it is dynamic. Like, a change doesn't change everything forever. Additional adjustments can be made.
Yeah, 1,000%. I mean, the latest MIPS that I know, like, the community is very frustrated by, was very much targeted at, like, what we saw happening, which was, what I refer to as active mapping, right? And the reason that active mapping, and I want to, like, talk about this a little bit if you guys don't mind, and is problematic, is I've seen this movie before. Is like, the movie does not end well, right? And the movie basically looks like, okay, you have all these people who are like, when I say active mapping, just to define what I mean by that, is like, you are going out to drive for the sole purpose of mapping. Like, you have no other reason to be on the road, right? And look, if you're out on the road and you're like, hey, there's a bursted location, 5 minutes from me, and you take a 5-minute detour, I'm like, that's cool. Like, that's up to you on an individual basis to, like, whether or not that's worth it, but that's totally fine. And I think that's a cool, unique aspect of Hivemapper, right? Like, we have this engaged community, and we have folks who are willing to, take a 5 or 10 minute detour to go, hit up a bursted location. But the problem is definitely, this active mapping. In other words, people going out for the sole purposes of mapping. Is, if you look at Mappery, right, they never achieved, in my view, the freshness necessary to actually build out a competitive map, because all they had was active mappers, right? And so if you look at there's data on this, actually. If you look at the country of Japan, it was mapped by like 2 or 3 people. What happened? Those 2 or 3 people, like, were like, hey, I'm tired. I got a job. I'm doing something else now. I can't do it anymore. And, like, it took 2 years for them to refresh that map of Japan, right? Because they had to go find these other active mappers, whatever it is, to go and do that, right? And so that's what ends up happening, right? Is like, you end up with 2 or 3 people by region or even by country, and they do the vast majority of it. They do it once, they get bored, they get a job, and they never do it again, right? Whereas if we build the system towards passive mapping, then you can engage with a lot more people, because it's easy, right? Like, hey, I'm already going out there. I don't give a shit. Like, I got this thing running. Cool. I'm mapping. It's in the background, whatever. I don't care that much, right? If you do that, then the city will just organically refresh itself. Now, I 100% agree with folks who say, well, it's not 100% passive today in terms of the technology. I agree with that. I 1,000% agree with that. And I think it's frustrating to me, right? And a lot of the work that we're doing here on the B and some of the other stuff in terms of moving Map AI to the edge is very focused on that. And so, that is where we're headed. And I know we're not 100% there today. And I respect that. And I understand that. But I want to make it very clear to the community in terms of, like, the tokenomics need to reflect where we're ultimately going in terms of building that high refresh cadence, because that is the big unlock from a value perspective, not just having somebody map, 3 people mapping the entire country of Japan once, and then not, seeing it being refreshed for a couple of years.
For sure. Yeah. And I think this needs to be a passive thing. I mean, you have to realize, though, with crypto, okay, it's very volatile. So when the market goes up, there's nothing you're going to be able to do to stop the active mapping thing from happening to an extent. Okay. Now, yeah. I agree, for like the long-term viability of the project, it has to be a passive thing, right? Yeah. It shouldn't be the primary source of income for someone to be out there putting a dash cam in their car.
Yeah.
So I think, you have to be careful with making adjustments based on where the crypto market and price is, without, I don't want to speculate on price here.
Yeah.
Because if the market drops, that can be an over adjustment very quickly.
Yeah. I mean, it is tough, 100%. Like, I don't think there's no, I mean, we're trying, look, putting aside like prices and markets and all that kind of stuff, like, we're trying to basically say is, how do we create this system so that from an incentive perspective, it is very unlikely that somebody is going to go out there and actively map, right? And you're right, Brad. Like, it is not easy to go do, but that is really the core thinking that went behind this. And I definitely want people to know, because there's so many like incredibly thoughtful people in the community who happen to be active mappers. And this is not personal. Like it's not a personal thing against them. We hope that they continue to stay very engaged in the community. But it is just kind of looking out and saying, okay, how do we get to that level of like incredibly high refresh passive, to really have a competitive, amazing map data product. And so that's where a lot of the thinking and decision making that went into that.
So just to pivot away from that real quick, something I've always been curious about. You're very outspoken on the culture of startups. You've made quite a few posts on Twitter about it. What type of work dynamic are you trying to incorporate into or create at Hivemapper?
So the answer I usually give to this is like, if you want to join most people know the difference between join the Navy and join the Navy SEALs, right? If you join the Navy, you get a job on a ship, you're working like 9 to 5, maybe a couple, times when things get stressful, a little bit longer, but fundamentally, like, it's more of a 9 to 5 type of job. If you join the Navy SEALs, like, what you're signing up for. It is not a 9 to 5 job, right? Like, they need you on the other side of the world, like right now. You're jumping in there. You may not sleep for a couple of days. It's very incredibly challenging. It's also very challenging, obviously, just to become a Navy SEAL, right? And so we are very interested at building an organization that looks and feels much more like joining the Navy SEALs, and understanding what that means, right? Like, when you go into the Navy SEALs, you're expecting to work hard. You're expecting to like do very challenging types of missions and operations. And this is not easy. Like, what we're doing is fundamentally really, really, really hard. And so I think it's like just unfair to people if they come into Hivemapper thinking that I'm joining the Navy, right? Like, hey, I'm going to go see the world. It's going to be cool. I'm going to go to a crypto conference, I'm going to hang out and, party a little bit at this crypto thing. Like, that's not us. Like, that's just like flat out not us. Like, we are going to build and we're going to work, and we know this isn't easy. We're trying to do a lot of different hard things, right? We're trying to build a map and all that means. We're trying to build a data labeling platform. We're trying to build we are building hardware, from the ground up, designing it, building it, etc. So there's a lot of different moving parts, and it is fundamentally challenging. And I think you have to be very clear with folks who are coming into our organization is like, this is not easy, but we like that. Like, if it was easy, we'd go work at Google and, work 3 days a week.
So to kind of piggyback on that, because there has been some turnover in the organization recently, and I don't know if you want to speak to that, because there's people are speculative about what may or may not have happened. So I want to open the door for you to talk to that if you want to.
Well, look, at least in Silicon Valley, that's all very natural, right? Like, in other words, there's different phases of a startup, and different phases of a startup require different kinds of people. And so this, a lot of the people who've left, over the last couple of months, like, they're amazingly talented people, right? And I have a lot of respect for them on a personal level and professional level. But you do need different kinds of people at different stages of the company, and especially at the speed and at the rate that we're growing at. I think it would be weird if that wasn't the case, right? Once you get into like the more stable, like, hey, we're at like a couple $100 million a year in revenue, and like, it's a little bit more mature, it's $1 billion or $3 billion in revenue. Like, things aren't changing that rapidly, right? And so the kind of people that you hire, they kind of know what to expect, and the organization as a whole isn't like changing that much. But we are changing very, very rapidly, right? I mean, the types of organizations that we're dealing with right now are like Fortune 25 companies, right? It's just different than like what's required when we were, nobody.
That's fair.
Yes, I will say one other thing is, like, I think from an organizational perspective, and this was my fault, to be very clear, and this affects Jay. For a lot of you worked with Jay, who's phenomenal. But what I felt like was, if you have a product you have to decide who is going to be the primary decision makers in the organization when it comes to product. My view is that, and I changed my view on this to be clear, is that those decisions should be very rooted in the technical engineering team. Okay. And you want the most technical folks who really understand the underlying technology to have the freedom to like re-rank prioritization in real time based upon what they're actually building. And if you're waiting for product management and product managers to like make those decisions, it just slows down the organization. And so we've kind of pivoted away from product management and said, no, all these decisions are going to be made at a much lower level in the organization by the engineers who are actually working on the problem, literally writing the code.
You mentioned that the project has been just growing like a Silicon Valley company. They're growing at a rapid rate. And I'm curious to know if you are where you are expected to be at this point in terms of revenue, participation. I know you introduced the new B. There's just been a surge of new people coming into this platform over the past couple of months. So would you like to speak about that?
Yeah, I mean, because we saw Hivemapper working before we had crypto, and then we saw Helium, I was not surprised that it was going to work or that it did work, right? And we had built like a lot of the underlying technology in terms of, geo-registration technology, a bunch of like back-end import and mapping technology to actually make the map beforehand. So like I knew it was going to work because I kind of seen this story kind of play out multiple times. I think the AI trainer platform, I knew that was going to work, but I think it surprised me as to like, I mentioned this before, like how well it worked and how quickly, like we went from, I don't know, a couple thousand people using it back in, the summer of last year to like, now I think we're at like 30,000. And so we've made intentional decisions right now to like basically slam the brakes on it. Right. Because like otherwise it'll just get bad, like it'll become a really bad experience for all these map AI trainers, and we just don't want that to happen. So we are trying to slam the brakes on it aggressively so that we can kind of rebuild so that the map AI trainers who are coming in have a better experience. I think that generally speaking, we are where we want to be. I mean, I always want to go faster, to be honest with you. So like I wish the B was like in production right now and we were shipping like 500 of them per day. So that's what I'm very focused on right now. And it feels, I'm a very impatient person. So it feels very slow to me, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But we have to go through a lot of the pain and torture associated with that product to get it to like where it needs to be.
I wanted to piggyback off of that because you talk about manufacturing and stuff. I know you guys manufacture in the US, and there's going to be two different cameras, the LTE and the Wi-Fi plus LTE. So do you have plans to stay in the US, and do you plan to do the same for the B, and how will that impact your ability to meet that demand?
Okay, so let's talk about this. This is a good question. Okay, so from a hardware manufacturing perspective, first of all, the HTC and the HTCS, I don't think we're expecting as many orders that we ultimately got. And so those things from a design perspective, they were not designed to be high volume manufacturing products. In other words, there's just fundamentally like a lot of, hands-on time that's required in order to go build those things, right? So you basically have, your option if you want to increase production, like you will reach a point, you will reach a kind of a max amount, but you just have to hire more people, right? Fundamentally. So the B is being designed to be a high volume manufacturing. Now, I will caveat that in a second, but so we should be able to produce a lot more because there's fewer overall parts, and just the way those parts actually come together is more optimized to be done by a robot, right? So obviously a lot of thought and process has gone into that such that we can actually do high throughput manufacturing. So the B is optimized to what I would refer to as like max from a annual volume, probably like 200,000 to 250,000, right? If you go about it, and it is being automated, to be clear, right? So every station will have robots, even the boxes, we're trying to say, like, how do you not involve a human in terms of like folding the boxes? How is that all done automated and all that kind of stuff, right? How do we like make sure that the foam inserts like just slide in a lot easier, that can be done by a robot, all that kind of like level of detail, right? So literally every little station is being automated with a robot. Now, if you want to go to the next level, let's call it 1 million units per year, then you actually have to build like semi-custom robots, right? At that point, you know, to take it up that level to that kind of volume, that is a different manufacturing process than we're having right now. So we're good in terms of like what we're building right now to like 200,000, 250,000 is probably where we can max out at. But I feel pretty good about that based on the demand that I'm seeing right now. If we were to get to that level of like 1 million units, then there is actually cost benefits associated with moving that production line outside the United States, but not at the current levels that we're at. Like that is like, if I look at the cost associated with it, like maybe we could, by moving it outside the United States, we could shave like 10 or 15 bucks off of it. That's not going to like make or break it. And if I have a problem, I can like jump on a flight and be there in like 3 hours, right? Versus like, you know, jumping on a flight to China or somewhere else where I'm not familiar with the language, I'm not familiar with the culture. It's a much longer flight, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's so hard to balance, you know, because like were you guys? I mean, you had to have been a little caught off guard in December when we had that gigantic influx of orders out of nowhere, right? I mean, I know you all ran a promotion, but that really, I mean, that did kind of hit out of nowhere in a sense, right? I mean, I remember talking to you in your office in like spring of 2023, and we were talking about how that happens, especially when there's crypto involved. But so what did you learn from that whole situation, out of curiosity?
Yeah, when crypto works, it can work too well. But I do want to also like just on that, because I think a lot of people will be like, hey, why did you do the promotion and all that kind of stuff? We made the decision to basically ultimately retire the HTC and HTCS in January timeframe. And that was my decision, right? And so basically what I saw happening was, so the idea was we're going to launch the B. We knew we were going to launch the B, obviously. But we were also going to keep the HTC as another option, right? And so, you know, people can disagree with me on this, but I basically felt like, look, at that point, you're gonna have two different production lines that are, in my view, would be subscale, right? And then you're not really going to get all the cost benefits associated with, you know, like volume purchase orders from suppliers, right? You're not going to be able to optimize and automate every single little step because your focus and your attention and your resources is going to be split between the HTC and the B, right? And so then I ultimately made the decision that like we have to retire the B, right? And that we're going to have to go down that path so that we can put all of our energy and resources in R&D and, you know, get the volume of orders up as high as possible such that we can actually get better deals with all the suppliers, right? Because if you go to a supplier for like, let's say the GNSS chip or the stereo depth cameras, and you say, I want to order 25,000 of these, that's very different than showing up saying, I want to order 5,000, right? You're just going to get a better deal, right? If you show up with 50,000, you're going to get a better deal than 25,000. And that's really what drives, you know, scale and manufacturing and all that kind of stuff that helps bring down the cost, right, to you guys and to other contributors all over the world. And so that was the thinking that went into this. There was nothing like nefarious, like we're like, hey, we want to like, you know, shove it to these people with the HTC or whatever. Like it was literally economics associated with if we had two different production lines, then your attention and resource, like you will never get to some sort of interesting cost-effective scale with either of them.
I'm curious to know, as far as for the B Wi-Fi and the B Wi-Fi plus cellular, are they fundamentally like the same frame so you can streamline the production? The only difference is the different bands within?
So they are the exact same device. The only thing is that for the Wi-Fi version, the literally the place where the LTE module sits there won't be anything there. So it is not I forgot the exact cost of the module. I think it was like 80 bucks or 75 bucks. I don't remember. Don't quote me on that. But that is you know, the only difference between the two. Yeah, so there is no other difference. I think this is you know, just being really transparent with you guys. Initially the LTE version, and maybe you guys can help us on this front, but originally the LTE version was selling at like roughly 70-30. So 70% of orders that were coming in were LTE and 30% were Wi-Fi, which was kind of like what we expected and what we were hoping for. Now what we're seeing is a little bit more 50-50. I don't think that's good. I think we have to fix that, right? I think part of it is like we have to be more clear with like how LTE is going to work and SIM cards and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think we need to better understand what the price, you know, what's the cost of that data plan going to look like, right? I know you all are trying to get the amount of data that's uploaded down, help with that, right? But I think people, like, we kind of need to understand what the cost of that service is going to be to make an educated decision there.
So still on that subject, I'm wondering some of the takeaways from the initial creation of the HDC, HDCS. Would you learn and incorporate into the new B dash cams?
Yeah, so the HDCS actually almost died, like as a project. What I'm going to say, not as a product, but like as a project. You know, many of you were incredibly patient and stayed with it, but you know, we ran into a lot of issues, and we were unsure as like whether or not we were going to continue. We thought we were like, okay, maybe we just give everybody their money back or whatever, but that didn't feel like the right thing to do. And there was some technology, specifically the depth sensors, the stereo depth cameras, that we really wanted to see working at a meaningful scale. So that was very important to us, that we saw that, and we saw that working at a really high level of scale, because what that meant was we can move all of what, you know, the Map AI processing engine to the device, right? If we have those stereo depth cameras in there. Obviously the HTC doesn't have those. And so I think that was very important learning, that we saw that and we experienced that at the level of scale that we needed to. So to me, that was probably the most critical learning between the two different devices that we have out there. You know, the other reason, you know, LTE as a piece of technology, we're not inventing anything new there, right? So a lot of people would yell at us, understandably, being like, hey, why don't you have LTE on the existing Hivemapper dashcam and the Hivemapper dashcam S model? And the reason didn't have to do anything with like, you can't put LTE on it until you actually figure out how to move Map AI such that you don't actually have to upload all the imagery, right? If you have to upload all the imagery and you have to do that all through LTE, it's not going to work. Like you will, it just simply won't work. And so, you know, step one was, how do we move all of the Map AI processing so that it can, you know, find objects, classify objects, and then position objects all on the device. And you have to do that, and you have to do that reliably well. Now the B is longer, you know, from a width perspective. And that is to accommodate what is called baseline of the stereo depth cameras. So you want those as wide as possible. If you've ever seen like a Subaru EyeSight, which is like their ADAS, you know, kind of automated driving, autonomous driving capabilities, if you notice, like they have stereo depth cameras as well. They're quite wide from one another. And so the reason that that's really important, or that width that we added to the B is really important, is such that we can see objects that are further away from the vehicle. And so that is, you know, if for every object, if you had to be like 5 meters from the vehicle or 7 meters, like there are some objects that you literally would never be able to map because they're just like further away from the road than 5 or 7 meters, right? Or you would just have to see the object many different times, right? And so we're like, okay, look, we're going to widen this out. And so that was one of the other kind of key learnings. From a GNSS perspective, you know, a lot of people give us shit about that, but the issue there is actually, I mean, there is some issues in terms of the GNSS module, that it was only single band. Now the new one is L1, L5, so dual band. But the bigger issue is actually the antenna. The GNSS antenna that we had was, in my view, was too small on both of the different models. And so the GNSS antenna that we have is actually really large. And I think it's just positioned better in the actual device, such that it can see more of the sky. We are looking at like PPK and RTK. There's some, it does not make sense to do it 100% of the time. For us, there are specific scenarios and specific locations where that it can be valuable to us, and we may employ it there. But there's some other approaches that we're also looking at, that like in a city, let's say, that has, and I don't want to go too deep into this because like we're getting pretty technical, but like if you have a city with, let's say, 500 or 1,000 active B devices, there's an approach to positioning where they can all kind of help themselves and apply GNSS or GPS corrections. But you do need to get like there's a certain level of scale to be able to go do that. That's probably its own topic that goes pretty technical, but happy to do that if you guys want to geek out on that stuff.
I'd love to, but I think we'll lose some people in the audience.
I saw I was like starting to lose, like I started talking about like GPS and all that kind of stuff.
We have, I think all of us have been involved in those types of projects, so we have some level of understanding how that works. It's very interesting to me, and I'm all for doing another show where maybe we bring on developers, some of your hardware engineers, and really geek out. There was a episode done on Helium Hack's Happy Hour. I was the one who coordinated that, by the way, with one of my good friends, Travis Teague, and one of your hardware engineers. And the information you get from this is just phenomenal. You get so much of an in-depth understanding. And when we talk about how this stuff works, for people who are able to dissect it and look at it logically, I think it puts some of the conspiracy theories to bed.
I'm sure new conspiracy theories will start to emerge. We'll put some to bed, and then you'll say something or I'll say something, and then boom, like some conspiracy theory will like.
So, what were some of your initial assumptions behind the customer map data expectations, and how have they differed as the requests have come in?
I mean, most of the customers that we're dealing with today are kinds of customers that I've been working with for a long time now. So I'm not like super surprised on them. I do think that like, as you get more and more into the automotive sector, which is like, maps for cars type of stuff, which I love, by the way, to be clear, is they really want to like open up the hood of the car, metaphorically, like they want to open up the hood of Hivemapper and really dig in and put their hands into the product, right? A lot of the customers, especially at the higher end, right, the customers who can spend, a lot of money with Hivemapper, they're technically very, very sophisticated, right? And so if you show up and you're like, here's my product, and I'm a vendor, and here's the data, and I don't tell you how it's created, and you can't see how it's created, and all that kind of stuff, I don't think that's very exciting for them. I don't think you're not going to build any level of trust and comfort with those customers if that's your sales approach. And so what I love about Hivemapper right now, and we're doing more of this, is like you can dig into the Map AI trainers. I mean, you as a customer can do Map AI training, right? In other words, like you're doing the QA, you're doing the data labeling and all that kind of stuff as a customer. And so you start to see how the map is made yourself, right? Like you don't just take our word for it when we show up in a sales presentation mode. It's like you can go do that yourself, right? And we're going to do more of this, right? So there's a project that we're working on right now called data sets. What that basically is customers can see, and everyone can see for that matter, the entire data taxonomy, right? In other words, you have speed limit signs, you have roads, you have lanes, you have specialized situations like road constructions or police activity or flooding. How do they all interrelate to each other, right? Like what are the relationships between these two different data sets? And then what are actual like real examples that we have in them? And then ultimately giving customers and members of the community the opportunity to add new objects, right? Like, hey, I don't know, I'm just making this up, but like, I want to go add commercial real estate signs to the map, right? Okay, great. Like add that into the data taxonomy, start to then label data, right? That is, it provides a good example that gets fed into Map AI. And then out the other end starts to come commercial real estate signs that show up on the map, right? And so I think that is a big part of what we're doing from a product perspective that aligns with what customers want, which is they want to feel like they can dig into it, right? Because a lot of these customers have their own mapping operation. And so if you just show up as, a vendor saying, here's my data, and then you don't show them how that data is getting created, it just doesn't work.
Another question I had, in the terms of untried ideas, what would you say some of the immediate successes are from the Hivemapper team? Things maybe weren't sure would work initially, but worked. And then on the other hand, what are some that maybe you had to send back to the drawing board?
Well, I don't think we've nailed the whole contribution through the phone yet. Like, in other words, there is value of people contributing and reporting issues through their phone, kind of like Waze style, as well as, the GPS data that comes from that, from the phone, which can provide valuable traffic information.
So, we've talked a little bit in the past about having the right type of driver. And I think fleets is going to be a big part of that. I personally have my own fleet. I know there are quite a few fleet managers out there now, but where do you see the future as far as fleets go? How critical is that going to be for the success of the project moving forward?
Yeah. Okay, so let's define fleets, because I think there's two types of fleets. I think there are fleets that are what I would refer to as like entrepreneurial fleets, right? Brad, you're an entrepreneur. Chris and Joe, you guys have fleets as well, right?
No.
Okay, so so we refer to those as entrepreneurial fleets, right? In other words, you buy 50, 70, 100 dash cams, whatever it is, and then you go and identify the right drivers, and you find those drivers, and then you split tokens with them and so forth, right? It's been obviously like massively important and valuable to the growth of the network. And we want to continue to support that. There's another type of fleet, which is commercial fleets, right? So these are people who have existing vehicles, right? So, hey, I have a pest control business and I have 75 different trucks. They're on the road every single day doing whatever, 7, 8, 10 stops per day or something like that, right? We also want to support them. They have slightly different needs. They're not primarily interested in the honey token. The honey token to them is like icing on the cake. They are interested in a lot of the safety features, which I'll talk about in a second, and kind of monitoring features that the dash cam provides them. They are interesting from the perspective of not every single type of fleet, but there are certain kinds of fleets. Like long haul truckers, from a fleet perspective, commercial fleet perspective, isn't super interesting. Going from like, I don't know, Chicago to San Francisco, whatever, through Highway 80, like we don't need that like that often. But the more interesting ones are like the local delivery ones, right? That's really valuable. And so we are, what you saw announced this past week and what we're definitely working towards is like, how do we add some of those safety features and monitoring features that are really important and relevant to those types of fleets? Now, we tried this with the Hivemapper Dashcam and the Hivemapper Dashcam S, and it didn't work. The reason it didn't work was because there was no LTE. And so the driver had to like go do all this additional shit. Sorry, I can't curse on your channel. Sorry about that. So had to do all this additional stuff to, move all the data. And that was like a non-starter for basically all of them. And so now with the B, it having LTE option, we can support those commercial fleets. And so we're working on doing that. The thing that they really care about is the ability to detect accidents, aggressive driving behaviors by their drivers, driving outside of the allotted time with their vehicle, right? Some of them say, okay, yeah, you can take your vehicle home, but you can't drive it on the weekends, right? As like your primary vehicle, like it's really a work vehicle. So there's all these different kinds of things that they really care about. And so we're going to add a lot of those capabilities and features so that we can go after that market. To be clear, like we are not going after, fleets like a FedEx, like they have, I don't know, 50,000, 70,000 vehicles, their requirements and feature list is like, 10 pages long. So that's not really what we're focused on. We're focused on, people who have maybe 50 vehicles or 200 or 300. That's kind of more of the sweet spot that we're going to be focused on.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, also, if the features become the primary purpose for them interacting with the project, it takes away some of the volatility of the crypto aspect of it, right? And I think that gives you more stability for sure. So I think that's the right way to look at it. And then, yeah, with the B, they won't have to do all that other shit.
Yeah. I mean, some of them even say to us, like, I don't even care about the honey tokens. Like, they just literally do not care at all. I think some of them are skeptical of it or just, don't want to deal with that hassle. And so, yes, like to them, it's about the capabilities number one. And then what we provide we have a big cost advantage, right? So if you go to like somebody like a Samsara, you're signing up for a minimum 3-year contract, right? And so per vehicle, you're probably paying $40 to $80 per month for 3 years. Like with Hivemapper, what we tell them is like, look, there's no contract, right? You buy the device. Here's the capabilities that you get. That's very appealing, especially to the smaller, fleet operators.
For sure. And I know personally, because I'm working with a lot of fleets, right, and business owners from my last job, that they pay a fair amount of money for these fleet management tools. So if you can find a way to easily subsidize the data they're collecting to cover some of the cost of that, whether it be the LTE plan or whatever, to replace that cost, I think there's a huge market there to tap into.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, yeah, they obviously they will have to pay for the LTE, so that's like their really ongoing cost. But what we've heard from them so far is like, look, I just like the fact that I'm not locked in, right? And so for 3 years or 5 years, so like, hey, if I stop using it, like, I don't have to continue to pay you guys or, whatever. So that I think is kind of from a cost perspective, really appealing to them. So it will definitely become, a big part of the network. It will take some time, right? I mean, you guys know this, some of you guys work on the B2B sales side. It doesn't just happen like that.
So what are some of your goals for the global coverage, say a year from now, 2 years from now? And you say it's not, something you can complete in 6 to 9 months. What's a realistic time frame you're looking at for a complete yet ongoing refreshed map?
Look, I think we're at like 20% of the global road network that we've done so far, which is great, which is amazing. I think by the end of this year, I don't know, we'll probably be at something like 35, maybe 40% of the global road network. Obviously, it's harder and harder, right, to find new roads, as many of you guys know. But the thing that I'm actually more focused on is like, take a region like LA, right? It's about, I don't know, the entire region of LA, the metro area is like roughly 100,000 road kilometers, right? So what I'm really focused on is saying is like, how do we get enough drivers in LA so that we can be refreshing, the major arteries of LA. There's a lot of them, to be clear, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times a week, right? That's kind of like the next challenge for us. When people say like, oh, Hivemapper is getting saturated, there's too many drivers. I mean, I look at like some of these regions, even like in LA, and just like, that's not the case at all. And so that incredibly high refresh rate, region by region, is the thing that I'm much more fixated on, because kind of going back to the beginning of like, what are the markets and use cases that we're after? Like, that's really when you start to get really, really interesting. I mean, the data products that you can provide when you're refreshing a region like LA, 5, 6, 7, 8 times a week is fundamentally different than if you do it, once every 2 months or every 3 months. So just they're totally different product, totally different ballgame. So at some point, what I want to do with the Explorer is like kind of change it so that it reflects more of that than it does like total coverage. Total coverage is nice as well. I think it's interesting so people understand just like how big the world is and how much work that we have ahead of us. But I think the refresh, is actually the more interesting aspect.
For sure. And I'm actually working on a video for MIP14. I think there's a lot of misconception around how progress is calculated and the factors going into that. They see 100% and think that, oh, it's oversaturated and it's being mapped 100% every single day, whatever. So I think it's important to kind of break down that calculation to understand what goes into that percentage, to kind of put it in perspective. Yeah. Like, no, this is not being overmapped yet. I mean, we're making major progress, but there's a long way to go for future contributors as well.
Yeah, it's a subject I've brought up a couple times in the past, just progress. I like the idea overall. I think, I alluded to or compare it to, how when we're all taxed as a nation, except certain large metropolitan areas typically take, more than their fair share of what they distribute into the system. They get out more than their fair share most of the time. whereas that is just an overall governance problem. But this looks to solve it by making that taking into account how much work is done in any given area through that, the weights and the multipliers. But when you put in front of someone the word progress, it just says, okay, these locations that are maxed out, there's really no, there's more of an incentive to keep mapping in that specific area. This is their thought process. More incentive to map in an area that's already maxed out and them get even more rewards. Why would anyone want to map the smaller locations or those that don't have that progress? And it's totally inverse of what's trying to be accomplished. So just that word by itself, progress, I think could be done away with for something else.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, Joe. I had thought about that specific word and some of the complications with it. I think that's a really good point.
I'm curious to know, you mentioned in some AMAs that you would working on some proof of concepts with notable companies or ones the community will recognize. I think you've said it on Twitter as well. Are you closing in on any large contracts with these people?
Some of those are closed, right? Some of those ones that we started last year that they've closed, and now they're kind of moving to like a, quarterly and now annual spend with some of those customers for sure. For some of the customers that we've now been working with for a while, what we're trying to do is like move them from like, okay, like I put down like whatever, 20, 30, $50,000 for like a proof of concept to, okay, now I'm spending, $500,000 a year, $1 million a year. There's like an annual recurring, contractual element to that. So that's a lot of the work that's happening right now from some of the top tier customers for sure. My sense in terms of like announcing this kind of stuff is I'm not like a big fan of it in terms of like announcing the name specifically. Because like, I don't know, like why tell our competitors like who we're working with kind of thing. Maybe we'll do it like in a couple of years when there's like a lot more customers and like we're a lot more mature and all that kind of stuff. But like for right now, I just kind of view it as like a little bit of a distraction. And then it kind of just opens us up in terms of, telling our our competitors who we're working with. So there's still, the big thing that we're seeing right now is that we're seeing customers come in the door and then they're the conversion rate to a data eval process is very, very high, which is great. Right. But then the data eval process, it's not, and I know Brad, you're in sales, so you can appreciate this. It needs to get like templatized, right? So you can just like move through them very, very predictably and rapidly. And so that's a lot of the effort right now is like taking those data evals and, creating a template around how they work, how long they go for, what actually occurs, so that they don't kind of just drag on for, a couple months.
For sure. And as you guys continue to evolve and have more products to offer, you can probably grow your revenue streams with some of these existing customers as well. And it'll make it easier to get in with some of their competitors, I would think.
Yeah. So that is a really, really good point. That's an excellent point. Like if you look right now, like I would argue the data products that we have right now speak to a relatively small percentage of the overall market. What we hear time and time again, and I think this was a question you guys had, is they want like one level up, right? In terms of data products and stuff like that. And so that's a lot of the effort that we're doing right now is like, in addition to the B, which is really high priority, it's, improving the Map AI processing engine to start building data products like one level up, so that the customers, there are definitely customers that want to go like, super, super granular. Like I want like X speed limit sign, or I want this or that, right? That layer of the map. There's other customers, they want like a higher level. And so that there's a lot of work to be able to offer that, but that is definitely what Brad, to your point, not only helps with our existing customers in terms of adopting new products, but there's a set of customers right now that we obviously know them, we talk to them, etc., but they're not technically sophisticated enough to be able to consume all of the types of products that we have right now.
You have any specific goals for revenue or customers in 2024, looking into 2025?
Yeah, I definitely have goals. I'm not going to share them in terms of on the revenue side. I think the more important thing from a customer perspective is that we kind of like what I was referring to before is like we build out a system where we can move customers from one phase to the other, and we can do that, 9 times out of 10 it's going to work. Like that process, that engine, that sales and marketing motion is going to work. Like to me, I think that's the bigger, more so than a specific revenue number. I want to like see that thing working and working very consistently throughout the entire organization. Because then that tells me is like, okay, I can add more salespeople, right? I can add more marketing people. If I see that core engine and system working, if you can bring in customers today, which we've shown we can, but then like the process is disjointed, right? And like the tooling that we are lacking in terms of helping customers, go through that data eval is not very mature, then all of those data evals are going to take a lot longer, right? All that type of stuff that I was telling you before. So that's the thing that we're focused on this year is like, how do we, create that sales and marketing motion that just works 90% of the time.
Awesome. I love it, man. I think because like I know you're focused on like the hardware side and the data collection side, which is super important, but equally as important is the revenue. I think a lot of people in the community, especially in these deep in projects, lose sight of the revenue aspect of it because, I mean, frankly, like it doesn't. If there's not revenue, not a product to be sold, then none of the collection of data matters at all, right? Yeah. So you need both ends of it. So, I try in my videos, and I know we all do, to try to like, stress that point because DeepIn so far has been really good at showing you can get a lot of participation. The next step that needs to happen is really the revenue side. I love that the token burn is going to have visibility into the revenue coming into the project as well. So I think, y'all are definitely focused on the right things.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Have you seen any interest in the Scout product along with the bursts from your customers thus far?
Yeah. So Scout, it's funny actually, like commercial real estate and real estate agents are using that thing a lot. It's pretty cool actually. Like, and they use it totally self-service, right? They're not going to spend a lot, to be able to like, warrant us putting like a salesperson on it, but they use it self-service and it's kind of cool. Like there's actually somebody in Texas who like literally like every week they just like hit the buy button. And so, and I don't even know who they are. So no, it's really cool to see like the Scout product work. And the other way we use it is in those data evals with customers, right? So we would, for like higher end customers who can spend a lot with us, they want to see, okay, what's the quality of data? Okay, what's the quality of coverage? What's the quality of freshness? And so the way that we actually show that to them is through using the Scout interface, right? So before they go to the API side, which takes obviously a little bit more time from an implementation perspective, we use the Scout and we use it quite aggressively. So what we'll do there, just to give people a little bit more color into that, is like we'll say, okay, like give us 50 locations or give us 1,000 locations or give us whatever, 75 locations. I mean, we try to cap it at some reasonable number. And then we say, okay, like how many times a week do you want to see this location, right? Boom, right? Okay, what map features do you want to see at these given locations? Do you want to see, turn restriction signs? Do you want to see speed limit signs? Do you want to see the number of traffic lights that we've detected, all that kind of stuff? So that's kind of like the other big thing that we're going to be working on is like surfacing some of that stuff up through Scout.
Yeah, it certainly is something that I'm interested in demoing and doing a couple YouTube videos on. I think getting that out to like, there's people in the community that say, here's a project I'm really interested in. I'm participating. I'm a host, I'm contributing. I have a fleet, but like maybe I could sell this as a business on the side. But how would I go about doing that? And that's something I'm interested in exploring as, a community content contributor, just giving people the tools to bring that to, maybe local municipalities, any sort of development or potential customers for them to, they make their side hustle participating in these kinds of projects, as we've seen from some of these other projects like Helium. There was always someone building IoT devices for business solutions, I think that's a path to explore.
Yeah. No, that definitely should happen, and it will happen. We're also seeing like we're not primarily focused on this market, but it's cool, right? That it's like happening just kind of organically. There's a gaming company that wants to kind of create these like virtual real worlds, and so they're trying to use Hivemapper for that kind of stuff. So it's kind of cool to see. Once you build the tools, and we're obviously, like we've talked about, very focused on navigation, like how do you move products and people from point A to point B, but just inevitably, like the tools that you create will also be useful for other, use cases and other verticals, which is awesome, right? And so I think like municipalities being one of them, games being another. So there's a whole bunch of other kind of verticals beyond just navigation that our tools will definitely be used for at some point.
I'm curious to know, are there any other projects in the crypto space that you're looking for collaborations or partnerships? I know with you guys being on the Solana blockchain, it really opens up the door because there's a lot of other deepen projects on Solana. You could have potential integration. I know Hivemapper is on Solana, but if that's not, I don't want to limit it just to Solana because there's other great projects on Polygon. Are you looking at any companies or any projects like that?
What's Polygon? Never heard of it.
I'm
joking.
Yeah.
I'm joking. I got all of a sudden become like religious about L1 blockchains, and I was like, I can't go there. Okay. So yes, there are. Let's see. So Hivemapper is obviously interesting to us, right? For the B. We're trying to figure out if we can make it work. And so I think there's still some challenges there, both our side as well as their side. So we're working towards it. Hopefully we can make it work, but it ultimately has to make sense, right? in terms of business, in terms of product on their end and our end, etc. We're looking to make a hire actually right now for basically like all this stuff, right? Like on the B for certification with all the different carriers, etc. Because that is a process. So hopefully we'll be able to like share more news on this. I know a lot of people are eager to hear about the LT and the cellular and all that kind of stuff. And I know, Joe, you've been really helpful in terms of starting to put together some content on that. There's another project that we're working towards, not ready to make an announcement yet, but we're working towards kind of like a hackathon where, how do I say this? There are some parts of Hivemapper that they can use, and there are some parts of this other project that they want Hivemapper for. And so like there's this hackathon that we're working towards kind of doing at a big conference, an AI focused conference that's coming up. And so I think that's going to be exciting. So stay tuned for that one.
Love it. Thanks. Great. You did talk a little bit about layer one. Is there anything you want to elaborate on there? Solana.
Hivemapper is going to become a layer one. I'm joking. No. No. I like everyone's like trying to become like a layer one or a layer two. I just think it's kind of funny and interesting. The number of times that I get pitched on like infrastructure type of stuff in crypto is like really high. Like somebody trying to sell us their stuff. And I'm like, that is not the issue. Like we are not gated because of lack of crypto infrastructure. And I think they're very disappointed to hear that, but it's just the truth, right? It's like, okay, well, what is actually gating our growth? That's not it. But no, I think, look, Solana's definitely had their challenges over the last 3 or 4 weeks, but those guys are professionals and they'll figure it out.
I can't wait to see all the speculation and conspiracy theories about you becoming a layer one now.
I know. I should have said that.
I'm sure someone will clip it.
Yeah, someone will clip it, and I was like, oh, crap.
Well, Ariel, thank you for being here. It's been a tremendous interview. We enjoy all the insight. Any last words from anyone?
Well, I really appreciate what you guys are doing, right? I think like educating folks who are coming into the community, who are potentially considering coming into the community, as well as those that are in the community. I think that you guys have done just a tremendous job, educating folks and keeping people level-headed, right? In terms of, these are, if your expectations are over here, like, check those at the door because kind of here's what's going on. I think that over the long term, if we keep that kind of culture, that type of mentality, I think that'll be really healthy for the overall ecosystem that we're building here.
I really appreciate those words. It means a lot to us, but we enjoy doing it. It's been a lot of fun for the most part.
It has been fun. I'm expanding my fleet. I'm up to like 80 now. I'm closing in on 100 here pretty soon. So it's been making some progress there. But yeah, man, I think things are moving in the right direction. Revenue's coming through the door. Participation's increasing. There's gonna be some bumps in the road. I've worked in tech startups, man. Like if you have to be able to roll with the punches a little bit. People coming into this, they think it's going to be like, Apple that's solidified. That's not the case. Like there's going to be some ups and downs, but I think overall, man, we've seen some really good progress. But I appreciate the feedback, by the way.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think hopefully every community has folks like you guys around it, kind of helping educate the folks, root them in the reality of, like you said, there's the ups and the downs associated with these projects. And I think people have to go in that with eyes wide open, right? It's like you're a builder, right? And you're participating and you're helping build this thing. And if that excites you, then that's awesome, right? If that doesn't excite you, then maybe this project isn't for you. And I don't know, like go do a meme coin or something like that, right? It's not very, like at the end of the day, it's not very satisfying, right? Like a meme coin, if you make a couple bucks off of a meme coin, like I don't think it added anything to the world. It didn't add anything to the world, quite frankly. But I think what we're building here, I think we can look back on 10 years from now, 15 years from now and be like, holy crap, we built a new fundamental map that is used by billions of people all over this world. And we were the early builders of that. I think I think that's very satisfying on a professional level and a personal level.
Agreed. Except that I think Dog Whiff Hat is going to save the world, obviously.
Well, there you go.
Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, appreciate you being here and sticking with us as always. Every other Sunday here on Brad's channel, Deep in Connection. Brad, Chris, thank you for contributing as always, even though it's Brad's show. And Ariel, thank you for being here. We've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.